It's really difficult to talk these days, generally. Feels like, very much like Shad's been saying, only one grief can be recognized at any moment, and each grief serves to justify the pain and the injustice and the crimes utilized against the other people. Ever since October 7th, it has felt like so much of our communities, both here in Israel, Palestine, and globally, are split by the divisions of whose pain you're willing to recognize, whose safety you're willing to recognize as legitimate, what crimes you're willing to denounce. And that split leaves very little room for humanity, for actual international law, as Shad was saying, and the recognition that we need to denounce all crimes of all sorts and never allow one type of violation to justify the others. God knows Palestinians have been suffering from Israeli war crimes of all sorts for decades. And on October 7th, and we need to start by, I think, also recognizing what happened on that day in the context of those decades of years of oppression and violence. The attack that took place, the Hamas attack on Israel, was a brutal, devastating, unjustifiable attack, killing hundreds of civilians with terrible atrocities, including rape and dismembering and truly terrible, terrible deeds, and hundreds of people who were kidnapped into Gaza, including children and elderly. That attack has shaken Israelis to the core. It is something that, I spent my entire life here. I don't remember anything like this, and I've lived through my teen years in the 90s when buses were exploding, the same in early 2000s, and through several wars. I do not remember, neither personally or collectively, such a feeling of fear, such a feeling of helplessness from the attack itself and the possible consequences of, at least in the first few weeks, we were fearing that this attack would blow up into a regional war, where the feeling was that our collective existence here was at actual risk. And that pain, which I want to talk about how that has miseducated the way that Israelis have been responding ever since. That pain and that feeling of helplessness and of having no security at all, which is new to us Israelis, including people like myself on the left, people like everyone on the team of 972 magazine, who are Israeli and Palestinian journalists working together. That feeling has been the reality for Palestinians for decades, of having no one to defend you, of having no one to protect you. But for Israelis, it's entirely new. As a response, immediately, Israel went into this attack mode. It's actually quite shocking to think back and remember that even as communities inside of Israel were still occupied by Hamas, where families were still massacred in their homes by Hamas, the army was not focused exclusively on rescuing people, but was already doing what it knows best how to do, which is attack Gaza. And we've heard from Shad all the terrible things that have been going on there, or at least some. There's the bombardment, but also the collective punishment of ethnic cleansing, the collective punishment of denying people basic supplies and water, and food, and fuel, and medicine. That has been going on for all this time. Just recently on Thursday, Week 972 and Local Call published an investigation proving what Palestinians know from the receiving end of this attack, how from the knowledge of Israeli intelligence soldiers, they're admitting that the attacks are knowingly such that would harm civilians, are knowingly attacks that would terrorize civilians. And that is from the perspective of soldiers within the Israeli army. So all of that has been happening, but internally in Israel, it's been immensely impossible to have that discussion. First and foremost, on a formal level, in the first couple of weeks and to a certain degree to this day, the oppression, especially against Palestinian citizens of Israel, but also to a degree against Jewish citizens, has been immense. We've seen hundreds of people arrested for writing a post on social media, some sympathetic of Hamas, but others just saying, I cry for the people in Gaza, or I'm calling for a ceasefire, or peace and security for all. Statements like that could land people in jail for several days and sometimes even longer. We've seen that happen from the beginning, from the day after the attack took place on October 7th. We've been seeing demonstrations oppressed by force. We had the chief of police in Israel say that anyone that wants to show sympathy in Gaza will be put on a bus and sent to Gaza. There's zero tolerance to anyone showing sympathy to the people of Gaza. And that has been the de facto reality, where any tiniest vigil of 5 people holding signs, stop the war, don't harm civilians on either side, the most benign messaging, will get immediately arrested. We've been seeing beyond the formal oppression, we're seeing employers and universities take initiative by either firing people, suspending students, suspending lecturers. We've even seen an Israeli bank recently close down the account of a human rights organization, saying they're publishing things critical of Israel on their social media account. So we're seeing the levels in which the society is fighting against anyone who's showing dissent are levels that we have never seen here before. It's personally, I can say it's been terrifying. I have 4 friends who had to leave their houses. I'm talking about Jewish Israeli friends who had to leave their houses because their addresses were published and it was made known in right-wing circles. These are traitors. These are people that support Palestinians. One of those houses was actually attacked. A friend of mine, Israel Fries, is a Jewish journalist who participated in a ceremony for the memory of all children killed, Jewish and Palestinian. And his house was attacked and his children were terrorized, and he's living in a safe house now. 3 other friends of mine had to escape their houses. And personally, the feeling that all that stands between myself and my family and us having to leave our house is somebody finding out my address and publishing it online. So the fear has been paralyzing for many, many people. There have been very few protests. There was actually only 2 protests in the whole 2 months that have passed that were approved by police, and that too only thanks to pressure from the court. And it's been very, very difficult to sustain, as even in those protests, there's been attempts by the police to oppress, to censor what signs people can bring to the protest and so on. Meanwhile, if you look at Israeli media, you feel like kind of a Groundhog Day sensation, where every day is October 7th. It's the only thing on the news, which both as an Israeli and a journalist, I understand. I mean, we have gone through collective trauma. We have had hundreds abducted, hundreds killed. We have hundreds of thousands who have been displaced and cannot go home. The stories of survivors are shocking. I understand the need to give a place for that and listen to those stories. And at the same time, again, both as an Israeli and as a journalist, the fact that nothing of the horrors, of the massacres, of the atrocities that our country is committing in Gaza is being transmitted to this public is horrendous. It's horrendous in every single sense, because it does not allow the war to end. It does not allow people to make educated choices, and does not allow the pain, the real pain of over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza to be known. I can say us 972 is a shared Israeli-Palestinian outlet that's been fighting apartheid for a very, very long time. We're seeing our 2 outlets, 972 magazine in English, has been growing its readership over tenfold. The recent investigations we've published have been echoed on AP and The Guardian and CNN and BBC and all over the world. And not a single Israeli media outlet has picked up our reporting to share the exclusive stories that we're telling about the war in Gaza. that has been a struggle against this silencing, where you listen to Israelis who are somehow made aware of something that happens in Gaza, and they're like, but we haven't done anything in Gaza. We haven't even started yet. And it's not because they necessarily want to see more blood, it's because they really have no idea. The same scenes that people all over the world are seeing, of destruction, of death, of mass graves, of children left without, entire families that have been wiped out. Nothing of that is reaching the Israeli public right now. And we're fighting to make room for that. This is a very, very dark time. I do not remember personally someone who's been active in resistance to the occupation and apartheid for about 25 years. I do not remember a time when it was so difficult to speak out, to get people's attention, to get any sort of recognition of the terror that Israel has been imposing on Palestinians for decades, and why I'm quoting Peter Beinart here, the Jewish American journalist who said in the very first week, if brutalizing Palestinians would offer Israelis any security, Israelis would not have gone through October 7th. If brutalizing Palestinians would offer Israelis any safety, we would have been safe after 1948. But that is not the case. The refusal to recognize that there are two peoples on this land that both deserve to live here, that both deserve security. And if one doesn't have security, the other doesn't have security. That is something that we are not able to impress on the Israeli public right now. We're very, very far from it. And still, I do want to say, in spite of all these difficulties, there have been people, both Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, who have been doing the very, very hard work of fighting to make space for everybody's pain, to make space for the recognition of the crimes that Israel is committing, to protest, to do the journalism, to do the shared work in our shared communities, to make that understandable, to do outreach internationally, to make the world understand and see how Israel is treating Palestinians and stop the war crimes and demand a ceasefire right now. There has been this work that's been taking place here. We're trying to fight to carve out that space where people can hold the pain and the tragedy of both these peoples and fight against this war and the war crimes. This is what we're trying to do. I'm grateful for you at JBL for being partners in this for a very long time, and now more than ever. Agnes asked about Arab states. Maybe I'll leave that mostly to Shahad, but I think very broadly speaking, there are wider interests to do, and there have always been wider interests to do with both regional politics, geopolitics, and global superpower alliances. I think we should read into the position of Arab states, mostly in terms of the relation to the US, Iran, Syria. I mean, those are the things that are playing out, and Palestinians are unfortunately just pawns that most of the Arab nations are playing with and don't actually care for, unfortunately, while Arab peoples we're seeing are very much committed to the Palestinian cause. Arab leaderships are too often committed much more to US interest than their own interest as corrupt authoritarian leaderships. And then on the last question about the several questions about the gap between Jews abroad and Jews here, that has been a growing gap for decades. Jewish Israelis care very little to what Jews abroad think. There's a disproportionate amount of attention being drawn by Jews abroad to what Israel is doing, compared to how little Israelis care for what anyone else in the world says about us here. And part of that, you said, do people watch the BBC? Nobody watches the BBC here. The only thing people watch is the satire shows that weekly mock the BBC for being anti-Semitic and pro-Hamas. So I mean, that's everything that people here know about the BBC, is how pro-Hamas it is, and you must listen to them. And then the last question on that was about the protests here. So yes, obviously, breaking the silence, the refuser movement, Week 972, standing together, the Communist Party, we're all very little, and we're all friends, and we're all working together. Like I said before, very briefly, it's been very, very difficult to carry out active resistance right now. It is frightening. It is difficult to break through, to reach people. It is dangerous. People have been beaten on the streets for trying to protest, either by police or for other people. It is just very, very dangerous at the moment. It doesn't mean that we're giving up and we're keeping up the fight, but it's been very, very difficult. And then lastly, thank you, Naomi, for your very kind words. I was not expecting that, but thanks for being there, being such an ally.